hasn't been hired top end, but
So you have shareholders.
yeah, by the time we get to the end, you almost.
Welcome to our December CiNPA meeting. You guys did.
Wow, Alan, you got taller.
Finally. My name's Alan Miller. I'm the president of CiNPA. Thank you for all of you for coming. A little different since it's a different location here. I'm glad you guys are the ones that found us. So that's good. Good for you. A couple things just to go through. Then we're going to get to what you came for, all the techie stuff. So in case you're not familiar with CiNPA, we're an IT professional group in Cincinnati. We're a 501(c)(3). We meet monthly, usually at the Evendale campus of Cincinnati State. We have a couple subgroups besides this main group. Matt runs the security group, and he's doing our meeting tonight. And Calvin, thank you. He knows when I need the cues. Runs the small business server special interest group. Anyway, we have a website. You can look on there. We have a few mailing lists, so you can sign up for any of these things just to find out about announcements and general discussion. A few things, just business. Next month, we have Zimcon is a local IT company. Their motto is infrastructure as a service. A gentleman named Asa Hensley is going to be presenting. I think he might be bringing another guy. So this meeting is always on the first Wednesday of every month. But you can find more information on the website about that. This is our December meeting. This is our annual election for board of directors and officers for CiNPA for the coming year. It's not real formal. We have actually a couple people that have been on the board past that I've coerced into staying on the board. We also have a couple new people that are going to join the board, and that's with everybody's approval, of course, with our election. The results will probably be in within a couple of weeks. But
We have to go through all those recounts.
right. Anyway, so I couldn't get anybody to take my job, so I'll be running for president. We have new entry, Jan Craterman. You want to stand up, Jan, so everybody can see it. He's agreed to take on the role of vice president. Kevin Royalty is our treasurer. Going down, we have a vacancy for the position of secretary, which has almost no work involved in it. If anybody wants to be on the board, there's an opportunity there. See me later. Chad Clausen is right here. He's our social media guy. And Kevin also has become the development director. Come on in. Sorry. People will turn their phones off.
Did you remind me?
Turn mine off, and then I missed the phone call when the caterer tried to call me. Ron Sherman and Brad Green are also board members at large. Ron and Brad. So, as long as I don't hear any objections to any of this, I'm going to say that this is all passed affirmatively. Anybody? Okay, good. That's what I like. As far as housekeeping, if anybody needs to use the restroom, if you go out this door here, turn to the right, go to the end of the hall, you have to turn left there. If you keep down that path, you'll find the restroom.
You certainly might eat some pastries. They're working on pastries right now.
Oh, yeah, the bakery. This is culinary school. My daughter's actually a graduate of the culinary school here. Okay, so we have food. I'm going to turn you guys loose. We're going to get food. Before we let the guys start with the presentation, a couple things. Please be very careful of your food in here. We've got soup, which could be a problem, but we're going to trust everybody to not make a mess. Food's out in the hall, drinks are here. The dinner is catered by Tom and Chi. There's 4 trays of like quarters of sandwiches out there. And each tray has a different type of sandwich in it. We got some signs on the glass wall behind it to tell you what it is. For salad, there's two kinds of soups, there's cookies, pickles.
Salad dressing.
Pardon?
Salad dressing.
Salad dressing, yes, of course. We'll give you guys a little bit of time to kind of get settled in, lunch away, and then we'll turn over to Matt and Daryl for the program for tonight. Does anybody have any questions?
And one thing,
Yes.
the topic for the small business group this
Yes,
month.
yes.
I have been working with a wireless company called Ingenious, and I spoke to their head technician, and we spent half an hour just geeking out over the phone, and he's scary good with wireless. And I asked him, hey, would you mind doing a presentation, kind of like a Q&A thing? He said, absolutely. So he is going to be our presenter remotely next week, Tuesday, at our normal meeting location, which is the Evendale campus.
And that meeting starts at 6:30, right?
6:30 till 9. He will not be able to do it until 8 o'clock.
All right.
So we'll have our normal
We'll self-entertain.
self-entertain, open floor until he's ready to start. So he's on the West Coast and all that stuff.
By
So
wireless, use Wi-Fi or cellular?
Wi-Fi.
So, in case, I'm sure Kevin told everybody, but in
Does
case
he
somebody
have
snuck in a different way.
We have the same question. Same question.
Yeah, if you haven't checked in, check in with Kevin at some point. We have vouchers for parking if you paid in the building, in the parking garage that's adjacent, near this building, so that'll get you out. But probably most of you have those already. And help yourself to some food.
Slide deck reasonably quick. My whole goal is to get to our featured speaker, Daryl. He's got a little bit of setup time, so I'm going to try to go through this at kind of a brisker pace than I maybe anticipated, but do my best to knock it out for you. So this is CiNPA Hackers Night. Thank you for coming out. If you haven't figured out, this is binary for the number 19. This is the 19th annual Hackers Night meeting for CiNPA. And talk a little bit about the history here. If you want to follow me on Twitter, I'm at C3RKAH. Definitely feel free to do that. The slide deck has been posted. Hopefully I made that public already, and it should be accessible. Anybody who wants to download that or follow along. My topic is why Script Kiddies Succeed, and my name is Matt Scheurer. So, the December meeting, the annual Hackers Night meeting, is the meeting that the CiNPA Security SIG, which is a security special interest group from the main CiNPA organization, we do this annually. We've been running it for quite a number of years. It started off, it was basically people that were part of CiNPA that had a penchant for security and had interesting things to talk about. And then eventually, as the Security SIG spun up, we've just kind of taken over and run it as the main meeting. So, I already talked about a good bit of that. What you may not know is, again, this is 19 years of Hackers Night. CiNPA is actually much older than that even. Traces its roots all the way back to Novell NetWare when it was the preeminent network microcomputer operating system out there. The Security SIG itself has been around for 14 years. And in fact, I'm running it now. My predecessor, also my boss, is right there, Brad Stroh. And his predecessor, Rob Michael, is right there. So we've got all but one of those years of history right in this room for running this group. So this makes us probably one of Cincinnati's oldest InfoSec meetup groups. The feature speaker started up a group in Dayton. It's sort of a similar group. They just celebrated their 12th anniversary maybe about half a year ago. So these are groups that have been around for a really long time, and it's kind of a remarkable story that we've continued growing. Certainly as I look at the history of the CiNPA Security SIG, there were a couple times when the group may have folded had it not been for Rob and Brad stepping up. So we would not be where we are today had it not been for them stepping up. And it's good to hear that there are members here that are stepping up into positions on the CiNPA board. We need those volunteers, folks. Yes?
I have to apologize. There's another new member to the board, and I lost my mind when I was making the announcements in the election. But Craig Schlesser, right there, is going to be our membership director.
All right.
Don't we get to vote on it?
Pardon?
Don't we get to vote on it?
I voted
Yeah, sure.
I voted against him.
All right, I do too.
This is the only vote that's ever been cast against anybody.
They get two.
All right, I'm sorry.
All right, fair enough. So, but yeah, they can always use more help. I'm involved in so much stuff I can't possibly take anything else. So I told a couple other people if I try, body parts are just going to start falling off. So please step up and volunteer if you can. And thank you, Jan, for doing that. It's very special. There's a mention on the mailing list. So right there is the address. It's on the CiNPA website if you want to sign up to the Security SIG mailing list. Please do so. It's not a high volume list. Mostly it's meeting communication, and also there are news articles or things people find interesting. Occasionally you'll see an email about that, but it's very low volume. You're not going to get inundated with it. It's a Google group. Just check your mail settings, make sure that you have those forwarding to your email account. So the CiNPA Security SIG, we talked about CiNPA meeting the first Wednesday of the month. The Security SIG meets on the third Thursday each month from 6:30 to 9 p.m. We usually meet sort of on the northwest corner of Cincinnati in Springdale, the big tall First Financial Bank building out there on the first floor. And as I mentioned, big tall First Financial Bank building. So feel free to join us for the meetings. All I ask is that please do RSVP through meetup.com just to let us know you're coming. We usually try to get vendors to sponsor food and so forth. And those meetings are free, by the way. So we encourage everybody to join CiNPA if you like what we're doing and you approve of how we're running things and our involvement in the community. Definitely consider joining CiNPA full time. Feel free to come check us out at the Security SIG. More than welcome to do so. Happy to have you. So sometimes we have gone with the Meet With Us If You Can Find Us thing. We've had to relocate periodical meeting here and there. I believe this is where we are tonight. So I just added a big list of places that over our 14-year history we've met. Some of these were one-time deals. Some of these were years long. Interesting stories behind the ones I can speak to. So about me, again, my name is Matt Scheurer. I'm a system security engineer at First Financial Bank. Hence why the meetings we have are on the first floor of the building I work out of. Can't beat that commute. I've been running the group now for officially a little over a year, and I speak at technology groups, InfoSec meetup conferences, you name it, all over the Ohio, Indiana, Kentucky tri-state. So what we're going to do is do some demos for you on all this stuff is within the Kali Linux suite, which is a downloadable Linux distribution. You can get it completely for free at kali.org. If you're not familiar with it, download it, check it out, play with it. You're going to get a quick little introduction and some quick things you can do with it tonight. So first thing I want to do is talk about OWASP Zap. And so I know some of you have seen this demo part, some of you haven't. So bear with me if you've seen it before. It's a pretty quick demo. But basically, it's something that will check your website for security problems. For those of you who have seen my active defense talk, including at last year, Hackers Night was sort of the preliminary version. This is something I added to it because I talked about setting up things to sort of fake accidental exposure, if you will, but I didn't really prove it. So you might be wondering, okay, you talk a good game, but how do we know this stuff really works? So I've got OWASP Zap here. You just very simply open it up. It's a free to download. You don't necessarily have to have Kali for this. As long as you got Java, you can run it on virtually any operating system. It's simply a matter of putting in the website address and clicking the attack button. And again, the topic is why Script Kiddies Succeed, and part of the reason is because security is very hard. There's a lot of moving parts to it. There's a lot that goes into it, and if you're not even patched, even if you do everything else right, you're likely to get compromised. And so I'm going to go ahead and stop this here. but this is spidered enough, and so this is basically a clone of my active defense website. And one of the things that I like to talk about is faking accidental exposure. So sensitive information exposure is number 3 now on the OWASP top 10 list, and that's exactly where cross-site scripting used to be. So you're like, okay, big deal, you spidered the website. What I've done is I've actually defined a robots text file and a sitemap.xml file that basically say, keep out of here, don't index this stuff, don't scan it. There's nothing that links to the active defense content. In theory, as an ordinary user, you would never stumble across this stuff. You would never find it. But if you're a bad guy with a tool like this or anything else, you can use wget. There's a million different other tools that will do this kind of thing for you. You can very quickly grab a list, including things that you were never intended to find. And so what I'm going to do is go ahead and do an export on this. And go ahead and over to SIG here. Demo. The barrier to entry for this stuff is very low. You should get the sense. Pull this up. And here's a CSV. We can open up any spreadsheet application and so forth. Looks good to me. And what we'll see here is we dig through this. So remember I talked about the robots text file and the sitemap XML file. You can see not only is it using those files where most things are intended to say, hey, if it's in here, ignore it. If it's in here, stay within these confines. Not only does it ignore the rules that we set for it, you can see it's actually using it to seed the activity so it knows, like, hey, they want me to stay out of here, so there's probably something juicy in here, something that they didn't want me to find. Now, those of you who see my active defense talk know that it's not really things you want to actually find, but if you're a threat actor and you're unsuspecting, you may not know. So here's a employee salary history xls.zip file, and you can see it's in like a docs folder, HR, employee salary history. These are the kind of things that sometimes get left behind on websites, or sometimes there are backup programs that will create a backup of the SQL databases, all kinds of stuff. Actually, over the last couple of years have been newsworthy that were data, basically breaches of data simply because the carelessness of having it on a web server where it maybe shouldn't be. And you can look through here, there's some other items as well. See if I can find them. So you're seeing a lot of the other active defense content here. Looking for it, but anyway, the bottom line is that it's going to find everything out. It's a very simple, quick tool. It took me very little time. Normally on a website, on a production website, it's going to take a lot longer for that scan to run. This is just a quick demo, but really the process is the same. There's really not a whole lot to it. And also, just another quick note before I do cancel out of here. When you're actually using this as its developers intended, you can find things that are potential problems here in the Alerts tab. These are the kind of things you want to drill into to understand, hey, what are my website vulnerabilities? What are the potential problems? And it gives you nice little suggestions in the descriptions on things that you can do to sort of fix those kinds of problems and why it's maybe important to fix these description boxes and so on. So I'm just going to close out of here real quick and keep moving along. This. Back to the slide deck here. So most of this stuff I pretty much already talked about. I'm going to go ahead and skip that. The next thing I want to demo is Sparta. So just by show of hands here, who has run Nmap or familiar with Nmap? I've done scans with it. So that's most of the people in the room, which is a good sign. So Nmap is a network, well, it's short for network mapper. And the idea is that it's a scanner that'll check hosts, IP ranges, those kind of things, to understand what ports are listing and so on. And that capacity is greatly expanded by the NSE scripting engine for that. But you start getting a lot of command line foo, and your script kiddies are starting out. They're probably not going to understand a lot of that. So I'm going to go ahead and pull up Sparta here and show you guys what it does and just how easy this is. I was going to scan the entire network range and pick up a couple other systems, including my local system and AP I've got up here to demo. In this case, though, in the interest of time, I'm just going to go ahead and put in the actual IP address of the system that I want to scan against. The system I'm scanning against, by the way, is called Metasploit 2. There's actually a third version now. It's a little bit different, so it's basically something that's designed to build up from scratch and basically give you a vulnerable Windows system. And it has a lot of neat things in there, so they've done things like they've put in the Apache struts vulnerability, got Equifax in a lot of trouble. But the old tried and true easy thing for me is simply just using Metasploit 2 for these purposes. It should give you the idea. So I'm going to go ahead and run the host discovery. I'm just defining one host here and running a stage Nmap scan so it finds all the nice stuff. So let me go ahead and see if I can make it worse. It's a little bit big here, but you get the idea. What it's doing is it's actually going ahead and scanning the host. As it starts finding things, you'll start seeing this stuff up here populate. It'll give you a good idea of the power of this tool. So this does Nmap, but it also does a bunch of other things that are sort of padded into it. So Nikto is another web vulnerability scanner that will basically check for problems that you have. It'll check against like the open source vulnerability database. It'll show you the problems that you have. As an attacker, as a script kiddie, we're going to look at that and say, okay, here are the potential weaknesses that I want to target and attack. There's just so much built this tool in one shot, and it's very quick and easy to run to get a lot of bang for your buck. It's extremely noisy, so a place that has good security, you're probably going to catch on real quick, like, hey, there's like a heck of a scan going on from a source system, you might want to check it out. But for places that have bad security, flat networks where these things are accessible, might definitely run into some problems. So for sure we know that port 80 is listening on this box, and if we let it run long enough, it'll find other things. And you can just kind of check through the tabs here, you get some basic information about the target system. And here's what I talked about, the output here. You can see some open source vulnerability problems. These are things that you would normally look up to remediate as a defender. And I think one of my key points tonight is with this stuff, that if your security won't stand up to just your quick little script kiddie-esque tests, the bad guys, the malicious threat actors that are out there are really going to find these things, and they're actually going to exploit them. But yeah, you can definitely live it on your own and kind of look through and see the different things it finds. You can see just with these OSVDB, the open source vulnerability database reference numbers. There's a lot wrong with this. Metasploit 2 is something that is intended to be vulnerable, so you can do these kinds of tests and so on. They make it a very good point that you don't want to put that thing directly in the internet or on a normal production network. That's really something you should only test with because it's so vulnerable. Very cool thing about this is it'll actually also say, hey, I detected a web server. Well, guess what? It's also going to go ahead and capture a screenshot for you so you know what the web server looks like when the scan is running. And again, this is not hard stuff, right? So these are the things that the bad guys, they can download it for free just like everybody else and run these scans. It's very simple for them to do. It's not even really a challenge. And so that's sort of real quickly on Sparta and the power of that. It would find more services and so forth if I let this thing continue to run. I'm not going to do that. And already, if you remember, we went from just showing the web server. Now all of a sudden we've got a lot of different services running on here, and it's telling us the ports, and even trying to detect versions. Very powerful tool, and a lot's integrated into it. So that's Sparta real quick. I'm going to go ahead and kill that now and go back to the slide deck. And so I pretty much already talked about this, so we're not scanning the whole network like I was going to do originally, but it'll reveal the hosts and services. Certainly you saw that in action. They'll also check discovered services for vulnerabilities. You certainly saw that. And collected screenshots of web services. Very useful if you're an attacker and you understand what it is you're after. So the final thing we're going to touch on is Metasploit Armitage. So Metasploit is basically what it says, a most used penetration testing software, and covers weaknesses in your defenses, focus on the right risks and improve security. Armitage is really just a graphical front end for it. It's the thing that makes it really easy for a script kiddie to basically leverage this very powerful tool with almost no knowledge. And we'll go ahead and demo that for you. And again, it's in Kali. You can also download this thing separate if you're so inclined. So in this live demo, I'm going to use Armitage in an attempt to find and exploit vulnerabilities on another host. And our goal is to establish a remote shell with root privileges. And with that, let's go ahead and take a look and see how that looks. Real quickly, here's the Metasploitable 2, and I've just kind of got the IP address up. That's basically the system that I'm attacking. Let me go ahead and go back to Kali here, and go ahead and exit out of this prompt, and I'm just going to fire up Armitage real quick.
Hey Matt,
Yes.
can we dim the lights a little bit?
Let me see if I can.
Thank you.
Is that good?
Yeah.
All right, apologize to our camera guy, you're probably losing it here. But, okay, so, yeah, we could launch Metasploit. We might actually have to learn something. As a script kiddie, I'm really starting out. I barely even know what an IP address is, let alone how to use some of these security tools. So we'll go ahead and fire this up. And it's just going to connect to the local host. You could, basically connect to a remote server if you were so inclined. For quick demo purposes, I haven't done anything. I'm going to intentionally flub up some things. As a script kiddie, I may not know, hey, I need to start the RPC service. Armitage has made it so easy. They even tell you, hey, knucklehead, you forgot to start this. But guess what? Do you want me to start it for you? Why, yes, I do. Thank you, Armitage. That was really nice of you. I could have spun my wheels for a couple hours trying to figure out why I couldn't connect to this thing, were it not for that. And so once this thing connects, you'll go ahead and see Armitage, and we'll just talk through that real quick. That's really kind of the last demo I have, but we'll see if we can totally compromise that vulnerable system. And so here we have it. Since I know the IP of the host, and again, from that Sparta scan, we could actually see what IPs, if we'd scanned the whole network, what do I want to put in here, what host do I want to add. I'm going to go ahead and manually type it in here. And add the host. Tells me it's added one host, and you see it right here. And let me see if I can make this a little bit bigger again. This will make it worse. Yeah. All right, well, let's stick with it like that. You see it's just kind of a black, dull screen. There's not really, it shows me the IP address. I manually typed it in here. It's not really telling me a whole lot. But if I right-click on it, I can scan this system. And you'll see down here that it's actually running a scan. It's real nice. It gives you, if you do know the Metasploit commands, you have the MSF console, Metasploit framework console. You can manually run your commands right there if you're so inclined. In this case, we've gone ahead and run a scan, and you see that we have a scan job that it's really in the process of running. And at this point, it's getting close to being done. So, but it's basically going through and finding, again, sort of similar to our Sparta, it's finding the services that are running on the system and basically giving us a little more information. And what you may have noticed, our black system now shows tux. So when you see that, you should probably pop your head, oh, the system I scanned is running Linux. It's detected as a Linux host. They actually graphically show you right on here that it's done, and looks like scans are still running a little bit. But I'm going to move on just real quickly. We can also take a look at the services tab and see a list of services here. And you see it's a nice big list of services, maybe a little bit clearer to look at than what we had in Sparta, and that's really just how simple they make it. So the interesting thing is that what we notice is the very first service is an FTP service running on port 21 and VS FTPD 2.3.4. And why that might get interesting is I'm going to click on here, and I really don't have any other options. So really where I go to next is attacks and find attacks. And now it's going to go ahead and actually try to understand, hey, this is what's here. Let me see what it might be vulnerable to. What could we possibly have? And you'll notice it comes back and tells us, okay, I'm done now. And now you'll see an attack menu attached to each host in the targets window. Happy hunting. And is it true? If I right click, sure enough, here's an attack option. I didn't have that before, but now I do. And look, I've got a nice list of services that were detected in here that we're running. So we'll just go with the top of the list here, FTP, and again, remember our log line down here, VSFTPD 2.3.4. Well, here's a VSFTPD 2.3.4 backdoor. That seems to be a good match. Why don't we try that one and see what happens? Now, when you're running Metasploit framework and you're typing in commands, you have to specify the local host, remote host, and your ports and all that sort of thing. As a script kiddie, that can be a little tough, but with Armitage, it does all that heavy lifting for you, man. You're a script kiddie, you don't need to know all this fancy stuff. Now, if you're serious about learning offensive security, you absolutely want to know this stuff and how to actually run the commands and put it all together, because you're actually going to learn something. Script kiddies aren't always in it for the learning process, they're in it to basically learn something. And again, for our stated goals, we're going to use a reverse connection to open up that reverse shell to see if we can get root access to the system. So all I got to do is check this box, hit launch, and then just kind of sit back and wait. And now you notice there's this exploit tab, and you'll start seeing a little more action here as it works through the process. But what it's doing is it's basically going to try to launch the attack on that service. And now, what you may have noticed is this turned red. You see the almost like the lightning bolts around it. Basically, at this point, that means, yeah, you've compromised the system and you have a remote shell. And what you'll also notice when you right-click on this is you have a shell menu. And so the first option is interact. So let's go ahead and see if we can connect to this thing. So sure enough, first thing I want to do, looks like we have a shell, run a who am I command. And let's see, are we running as root? Well, yes, we are. So that's one of our objectives, right? We compromise the system. We have root level access. We could do stuff in here if we wanted to. Print the working directory. We can also go ahead and grab the shadow file, see if we can collect some hashes, maybe things that we can fire up like John the Ripper and crack these passwords if we're so inclined. We could also just kind of leave our little calling card. Post-exploitation at this point, what they'll often do is they're going to try to find, hey, where's the web server running? I can easily deface this website if I know the directory. If I find the directory, there's nothing that's going to prevent me from overwriting files. So let's go ahead and switch over to the home directory here real quick and do an ls and see what directories are in here. So here's a folder called, or a directory called user. I'm going to go ahead and switch over to that one. See if there's anything in here. Really there isn't, other than just like the .profile and the define shell and some of these hidden folders, history, that sort of thing. But maybe I want to leave my calling card, so let's do an echo and pipe it out to Oops. Echo space, and now they own you, exclamation point, greater than symbol, type it out to a file, and we'll call it owned.txt. Before I actually do that, let me show you here on the system that we've compromised. So here I can, switch over to the home user folder, and that could be, that would be like a real username. If I do a ls, there's nothing in here, so it's completely empty. Come back to my Kali box and hit enter. It should have created that file. If I do an ls, sure enough, here's our home.txt file. I'm just going to go ahead and bounce it back to the Metasploitable. Remember, it was empty before. Now if I do my ls, here's our home.txt file. So I'm definitely have full privileges out here. In fact, something that you'll notice is, let me go ahead and do a cat home.txt here on the system that's compromised. You'll notice permission denied. And what you probably have a hard time seeing is that shows the login as MSF admin at Metasploitable. So that's that account. What could be the reason I can't get to that? So I do an LSAL, and sure enough, it's owned by the root account, right? So that's why when I do my cat home.txt, it's permission denied. If I do a sudo bang bang, it's going to ask me for the password. And boom, and there's the message, and now they own you. And it's right there on the box. So we have definitely compromised it. In fact, at the Kali VM running Armitage, we actually have more control in this console that we've hacked our way into than we had if we were on the local system itself. Wrap it up here. So that's the demo. So a couple things I want to talk about is they're like, oh, okay, stuff's cool. It's kind of easy. Like, I understand now why it is that Script Kiddies are able to topple systems and basically own them. Where do I go from here? So there's a great free course called Metasploit Unleashed from Offensive Security. There's the link to it. It's absolutely free. They do ask if you're inclined. They appreciate donations to Hackers for Charity. There's a link there where you can donate $10 or whatever you feel fit. Definitely worth doing. It takes a little bit of time to work through it, but it'll walk you through all different parts of Metasploit, not just the quick little things I showed you. And then also another place to level up is, even though we're here as the CiNPA Security SIG running the main group meeting, we're still having our monthly meeting as the Security SIG. And so Thursday, December 20th, we're running it, and actually I'm running it, an offensive security workshop. And so bring a laptop with you. You're going to need that if you want to participate. And we're going to do workshop sessions on TCP attacks, password cracking, and exploiting shell shock vulnerabilities. And I haven't officially announced this yet. Again, you guys have the link to the slide deck. You can hop out there and register. Or if you just look at the date on the calendar, you'll find it.
Can you put the slide up with the link to the slide deck again?
It's at the very end here.
Okay, oh, super.
So there you go. And again, here's the link, slideshare.net/circa. And again, if you're not following me on Twitter, feel free to do so. That's all I have. I'm going to turn the floor over to Daryl. Thank you, everyone. I appreciate it.
So we're not really going to have any slides. We're going to do some demos. But just want to walk through. So I have this primer that I can make available. It just kind of covers some of the concepts and tools and stuff. But as we get started, my name is Daryl Hyland. I am the research lead for IoT technology at Rapid7. So what does that mean? It's kind of interesting. So I took the role about 3 years ago. I have a number of years of experience doing research. A lot of it's embedded technology, and obviously IoT technology is very much an embedded type technology. The interesting thing is when they came to me and offered me the position, I didn't even know what the hell IoT stood for. Yeah, let me give that a think, and I'll get back to you tomorrow. I'm like, what the hell is IoT? Oh, shit, okay. To me, it's just some crazy marketing term that we're forced to live with now, and it can be very deceiving in a lot of cases, especially when you're trying to communicate risk, vulnerabilities, and stuff like that to corporations and enterprises and stuff, which is a whole nother talk, which I've done a number of times. But if anyone wants to have that conversation, feel free to reach out to me. I've been with Rapid7 for 5 years, actually this month, 5 years. I've been in IT and security combined for probably close to 25, 30 years. I worked at a number of different companies, and I've been doing consulting and pen testing prior to taking the research role for upwards of 10 years, where I worked for a couple companies doing pen testing and consulting for government, corporations, and stuff like that around security attacks, offensive attacks in their environments. So the presentation we want to talk about today is kind of like just kind of diving into the whole hardware hacking. I run into so many people that are kind of interested in this, but they're always a little taken back. They're a little concerned. You know, I don't know electronics. I don't know this. How do I get started? That type of thing. So I'm always having that kind of conversation with people. So I put this primer together, and it's kind of a rough primer, but it talks about some of the general tools and concepts that kind of get in the door and start playing with it. And the big focus of the presentation tonight is like get people away from thinking that this stuff's magic. It's not magic. It's just looking at technology at a different level or a different direction. And I think once you see it and go out there and give some of this stuff a try yourself, you'll find out it's really not that hard or not that difficult. And you can pick it up fairly quick. You know, we get into, you know, like I'm not going to get into this, but when it comes to disassembling technology, one, if you're going to hack into something and you're going to play with the hardware, you have to understand how to get the thing apart. There's a number of different ways of doing that. If you're dealing with a technology like this that has a lot of RF communication, you can pull the FCC ID off this, go out to the FCC sites, FCC website, poke that number in there and get exploded views of these things taken apart. And often that will give you a clue on how to disassemble the technology. It'll show you where the screw mounts are. You can often identify the clips, those things. So it makes it possible for you to get the device apart without like severing fingers and bleeding to death and bad things like that. And again, there's a number of different tools you can use. You know, everything from pliers to, you know, screwdrivers, all these things you're going to need. There's the, you can order these spudge type devices. They're little pry devices. Come in all different types of sets. You know, they're made out of either wood or fiberglass or even metal. I've had sponges that are real thin and metal. So get a small set of those, come in really handy for prying things apart, taking them apart. I always recommend a good soldering iron. So I don't know if you want to call this a good soldering iron. I have this as a Hagco. It works pretty good for all the needs that I have. So having a good adjustable soldering iron comes into play. Of course, I'm kind of weird when it comes to this. The first thing I do is set it to the highest temperature possible, and I just leave it there.
That's not weird.
I can solder way much better that way. I'm quick, I'm accurate, and I also use the tip that comes with it. So, you know, I typically can solder on surface mount devices that are 30, 40 gauge wire using a tip that's 10 times wider than the component with the highest heat possible, and instantly it's just tap it and done. I found out the smaller tips and the lower temperatures just means you're on the board longer and often do more damage to the actual chips, more damage to the pads. So if you're quick and accurate and get comfortable with it, literally this thing starts off at like 850. I actually crank it up to the highest number possible, 899. So it circles back around after that, highest temperature possible, and it works pretty good. A standard multimeter, cheap one, I think this was like 10 bucks, 12 bucks. I don't even know, it's a Craftsman. It works. It's for basic type stuff. It comes in pretty handy, always good to have that. A logic analyzer. These come in various qualities. The one shown on there is a Sele, and we're actually going to be demoing with the Sele here in a minute. and showing you how a logic analyzer kind of works. And it's kind of cool. I live by these things. I start off a lot of my testing with a digital logic analyzer. And we have a picture. We have one sitting here already plugged up, ready to go. So those come in handy. Tools like JTagulator. When I first started, these are kind of cool. You can identify all the headers on a device and literally connect all these up, all the possible plugs on the device, and then run this. And it does two things. It'll actually go through and enumerate all the possible combinations for JTAG, or you can configure it to go through all the possible permutations for UART. The only time the JTAG thing kind of is any value is if you can't get a data sheet. If you can't get a data sheet on the actual component, then this may be good to hook up and try to figure it out. But if you get a data sheet, a usable data sheet on the actual MCU or CPU on the device, it's often better to just look at the data sheet and figure out where JTAG's typically pinned out on the device. On the UART, I used this a number of times early on with UART, then I realized, hey, this is stupid. I can use a logic analyzer, which is way much easier to use, which we'll go over. And kind of pricey. I think it's like $169. But I still know people that use these quite a bit. And then you can get these small devices like this. This one here is a bus pirate. This one here is a Scheurer. They pretty much do the same thing. The difference is this thing's like 10 times faster than this. And it actually works. I'm not a big fan of the bus pirate. I actually took my bus pirate, blew the firmware off of it, and actually installed a firmware package called STK500, which is used for a specific series of processors. And then it actually started working with this shit. So, and that's how I typically use it. They often do like SPI, serial program interface, JTAG capabilities, UART. Often I use them for mainly UART. I will use it for SPI, serial program interface, to pull memory off chips sometimes. That's if I'm going to do it in circuit. I also found out when it comes to actually identifying memory chips that are on a board and actually pulling the data off of it, 9 times out of 10, it's easier just to desolder the chip, drop it into a cheap reader, pull the data, and then just solder it back on. I can usually do that in half the time of fiddle-farting around with some of this stuff, which can fight you. Because often when you tap into a chip that's on board, like a memory chip, and you want to read it while it's in memory, the problem is the CPU or MCU is going to constantly reset that memory chip, so you're never going to get any data off of it unless you take the reset pin on the processor into reset mode, causing the processor to shut down. So if you're dealing with something you can easily identify in reset or reset in on the actual processor and ground it out, then this is doable. But if you got to go find the data sheet, dig through the data sheet, figure out where they programmed in reset in, and hopefully it's not a BGA, well, ball grid array device where all the pins are underneath and you can't get to it. All that time, you can, once you learn how to solder, which I mentioned, get comfortable with soldering, it comes in really handy. You can easily desolder the chip, drop it into a $100 chip reader, which will read like 15,000 different memory chips that you'll come across. It's like $99 to $100. Pull the data off of it, and then put it back on the board, and just solder it back on. That's all. SIG or J-Link for doing JTAGs. I prefer that over using some of the other devices' JTAG capabilities. Blackmagic Probe, it's kind of interesting. It was purely designed for the ARM Cortex-M and Cortex-A to be able to do things like serial wire debug, which is kind of a subset of JTAG. I've used it a few times, but I also have a good SIG or J-Link, and that also supports serial wire debug, and the software for it's much easier to work with most of the time. You could also program a BeagleBone to do all this, SPI, UART, JTAG. You could literally put everything, do everything off this. Just a matter of programming it. Always need supplies. Often when we get a board, there's no pins to plug into. You have to solder them on the board. So going out and actually purchasing these, they come in two typical flavors. That's 1.27 millimeter pitch and 2.54 millimeter pitch. And then just buy a whole crap load of the ribbon cable. So then you just plug everything up. And I have tons of this stuff. I have these headers in singles. I have these headers in doubles in both sizes. I have them in gull wings so they mount on the surface. I have them so they mount on the edge. You know, as I encounter more and more cases where I need something different, I just buy a whole bag full of them and throw them in a shelf. That way I don't have to worry about it anymore. Most of these are fairly inexpensive. And like we mentioned, hardware disassembly. Here's some examples of FCC. So this happens to be an Insteon device, so you can actually pull it off the back of the device and then go to the website and identify the exploded out, and you can identify like the screw mount holes, showing the pictures from like the FCC site, and identify how the thing's disassembled, so that comes in handy. In this case here, as an example, as you can see, this was actually cut apart with a Dremel tool. It was hermetically sealed. Once we identified, hey, there's no way this thing's coming apart, bring out the saw. Sometimes you have to do that, so you want to do it safely, so you don't sever any fingers. Wear safety glasses, because in this case here, hot plastic's flying everywhere when that Dremel tool running. But I ripped through it in like 3 minutes without doing any damage to the device. And then we get into circuit examination when we start thinking about technology. The good thing is just take a good look at the board. And this is what I tell people to do. When you want to start doing this, start out first just examining board technology. Go down to Goodwill or some other place and buy technology, electronic gear that's 5, 6 years old. People are throwing away wireless access points, little bridges, all these different devices. Take them apart. Start looking at all the devices. Here's one that actually identified UART on the actual board. UART is Universal Asynchronous Receive Transmit. If it's running a full bedded Linux operating system, you can actually get a full console on there. And then you can maybe hack from there. Maybe it will give you root right out of the box. I still run in the devices all the time. I pull them out, hook everything up, and I get root right out of the box without having to do anything, just by attaching to the UART. But start examining the devices. Go out and pull data, the data sheets for all the components, the actual devices. Here's kind of a breakdown of a board. This is one, if you haven't seen my presentation, I think DerbyCon, I did this, where we talked about this specific board. And that talk gets into a little bit hardcore type hardware hacking. This kind of breaks it all down. Here's some open headers. Here's one where we soldered it in, 2.54. Identify the ARM processor. You can go out, like I said, get the data sheets, look through the data sheets, figure it out here. This happens to be an embedded multimedia flash memory. We come up here, we have a Zigbee processor, Bluetooth processor. I think that's actually the Wi-Fi processor right there. I didn't label that. And of course, USB and Ethernet on this device here. Just real quick on this one. This one was a little more hardcore. When I actually hooked into this header here, I was able to get a UART, but I didn't have the password. I didn't know how to get into it. Every attack failed. So what we did was we pulled the embedded multimedia controller, was able to mount that up on my system through an embedded multimedia controller reader. And then what we did was we actually DD'd the running partition images off, unexploded them, rewrote user root password, rewrote a new user account password on the system, packed the whole file system back up, DD'd it back to the chip, and then we hand reballed the BGA and refloated in a hot air oven, powered the thing up, and had root access. So that's kind of root. The gist of the presentation is root access to hardware. But it's one of the methods, and it gave me a chance because I didn't know how to reball BGA. So I was able to buy the equipment and teach myself how to do that. It's just hardware hacking is this ongoing process. I encounter things new all the time. And then I have to sit down, find some time, lab it up, figure out how it works, and go to the next level. And this was one of those examples. I'm not going to go example where I talk about firmware. There's like the backside of that BGA, embedded multimedia roller. So the pins on this thing are pads are 0.3 millimeter pitch. So literally, this thing here is only about the size of a penny, or would set on the face of a penny. Is how soft it is. So yeah, it was a fun learning experience. Any questions?
With hot air oven?
IR. They use an IR oven. I think IR works way much better. I do have a hot air reflow, and sometimes I'll use that for pulling devices. But I only use them now to pull devices if I can't get them in the oven. The big thing with the oven, though, remember that the solder is not the only thing that may melt. You have, power jacks, speakers, all kinds of things on their wires. So you got to take that into consideration when you throw it in an oven, or you pull it out and your speaker's like flat. Or your power jack's kind of sagged to one side. So you got to think about those also. So what we're going to do is I want to talk about this device here. Fortunately, the lighting here is kind of crappy. Let's see if we can look at this. Let's move it around a little bit. What we're looking at here, I'm going to move it over here because I want to show some other stuff. A little more. You can't really see the. Gosh, it's horrible. A little better? Yeah. Okay, cool. Cool, so we'll just do it here. So as we look at this device right here, we have a couple headers here. We have a header here, a double one that was open, and we had a header up here. So the first thing you want to do is, often when I look at these devices, I want to identify what some of these headers are. So we go ahead and we solder components on these. We also do a little research on the processors. We have a number of processors here that do different things. I think this thing does Bluetooth, and they do, I think it's all Bluetooth, matter of fact, because this is actually a Hue Bridge. How many people have Hue lights in their house? Cool, you probably have a Hue Bridge now. All right. So you're going to learn how to hack your Hue Bridge, if this one hasn't already been hacked. These are training devices that I use for training, so hopefully someone can put it back to its original state. But if not, we'll go ahead and do that. So there's a couple cool things on here. One, this is an actual UART, but how do we identify as a UART? So the one thing I want to do is we have a logic analyzer here. So here is a CiNPA logic analyzer. This is an 8-channel one. And I only got 4 of the channels hooked up. And the weird thing with these is the upper 4 are actually the different channels, 0 through 3. All the other 4 down here are all ground. Now, why they want to put all that many ground on there, I don't know. It's kind of a pain. But what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and we're going to hook up to this device. Now, we want to hook to ground. And one of the ways we would hook to ground is we have to identify what the actual ground is. One of the main first things, what is actually ground? So here you can hear this multimeter. I've got it set in continuity. Okay? And then what we want to do is we want to figure out what is actual ground. So if we come over here, we can hook to right there. Often shielding on devices will be ground, will be system ground. Often these screw connectors will be system ground. And we have this header here, so if we come down this header and walk down this header, we find out that the very last one, number 6 on this thing, is actually ground. So now we know where the ground's at. First step. And then what we want to do is we want to hook one of these lower black ones to it. And then we want to go ahead and hook all the other devices. I usually tell people you can put these in order or you can just plug them in randomly. But I'm going to go from the left over. And hook this logic analyzer up. We'll see if we go, our demos work good. Okay, so now we got it hooked up. You can see they're all plugged in there. See that good? Hooked up. We have the logic analyzers hooked to the system, and then we have the actual program called logic that comes with the CiNPA. So under start, you can set up all the channels. In this case here, we only have 4 channels enabled. I don't care about the other 4 in this particular case. We have the sampling rate set at 20 milliseconds, and we're going to run for 15 seconds. So the goal is we start this thing, start it, it's running, and then we plug it in, and hopefully this device actually works and it's not dead or something crazy. Okay, so it's finished running. I usually take the lower arrow key and I drop it down, and quickly we can see that we actually have data here. So we can continue drilling down into this data. And it happens to be on channel 1. And as we can see, let's see if we can pull this up. So as we can see, there's some kind of communication taking place on that. And we notice there's nothing else on none of the other ones. This is often can be an indication of UART. If you're dealing with asynchronous communication, we don't have a clocking channel. So we don't see a clocking channel on this connections at all. Now that doesn't mean we won't have other data or something like that on one of the other ones. But I often see it this way. I see a single channel that is actually moving some type of data. The cool thing with this device, we can actually put an analyzer to it. And we think it's async, we can attempt async. And it's channel 1. So we pick channel 1. The next thing is you have to do the baud rate. Okay? So what is the baud rate? Well, I'll be honest with you. I never do the math. The only time I ever do the math is if none of the other options work. Basically, the math is you measure one of these, the shortest one of these. So you go through here and find the shortest one, and the logic tool will help you do that. And you basically divide that into 1 second. And you're going to get the amount of cycles in a second, which is baud rate, or bits per second. And that's one way to do it. The other way to do it is swag. Make it out your ass. But remember, they're fixed. So often we see the most common ones. And they are 38400, 576000, and also 115200. Those are the 3 most common baud rates that you're going to encounter on most modern technology, with 115200 being obviously the very most common. So we're going to have to set that. Often, all of these settings here are the same. The bits, the stop bits, very much standard. I rarely see anything that's not standard other than a manufacturer trying to obfuscate stuff. And you will get some doing weird clock frequencies, weird settings, but it's pretty rare. So we can save that out, and instantly, if we look up at the top, you can see it's decoded. Hopefully you can see that. Right here. So if we look up there, I don't have a pointer. I don't know if anyone can see it, but you can read it over here too. It actually says boot. Okay, so we've actually decoded that. There's no way to make that bigger. Sorry about that. But it actually has some carriage return line feeds. It says boot. So what we're looking at is the system booting up. So we actually can identify, we've decoded it, it's actually ASCII, and we can quickly identify that we have some kind of system booting up. So now we know where, turns out, once we follow back from our logic analyzer, we can identify where the transmit pin is on the device, because this is the transmit. The one thing we don't know is the receive. That's a real easy rule of thumb. We actually have a channel 0 and a channel 2, one on each side. Receive is going to be on one side or the other. And currently both of those are 0 volts. If one of them was constantly high, it obviously wouldn't be the receive, so we go to the other side. So this is what we used to refer to in the Navy as a 50-50-90 situation. What that means is when given 50-50 choice, 90% of the time you're going to be wrong the first time. And when that happens, just plug it in the other side. You're not going to hurt anything in this case here, or any case for the most part, because we're dealing with 3.3 volts most of the time. And we're not dealing with a system that has multiple different voltages. If you get into some more complex circuits that have different voltages, where you may have 1.5 to 5 volts, then you may be a little more critical about some of the voltages and what you plug your devices into. So the next thing we want to do is we want to hook up and see if we can get ourselves a console in this device. So the way we do that is, hopefully I have enough wires on this one. Pull some out here in a second. Tons and tons of wires. You know, I go through these things like crazy, these big bundles. I never keep them. As soon as I pull them off and use them once, I just throw them over my shoulder and sweep them up a week later. Because it turns into a big rat's nest. It's nice to have the nice ribbon cables when you need one. You don't want to dig through a rat's nest trying to find one. Okay, let's slide this back here. Let's unplug the power on that. And here we have, so here we have what I showed you earlier, which is a Scheurer put out by Exhibitor. And this has transmit, receive, and we also have ground. Ground happens to be pin 18. So now all we want to do is we want to go ahead and hook it up. And now when you're hooking it up, this is what I tell everyone. Now, this is not what I actually do. This is what I tell everyone. They say when you hook up, pay attention, hook transmit to receive, receive to transmit. Well, what I do is I just hook it up. If it don't work, I swap it. Often that's much easier than trying. I like trying to find my glasses so I can actually read what I'm plugging into. So. Go ahead and hook this up. What do you think the odds are this won't work the first time because I hook transmit, receive, receive?
90%.
No, it's actually 90. Remember I told you the rule. It's the old military rule, 50-50-90. When given true 50-50 odds, 90% of the time you're going to be wrong. Go ahead and plug this in.
So we can't see your pin plug.
So there we go. We got it all plugged in there. The device is plugged into my power strip right here. And I think I got all those hooked up correct. And then I use a program. This is not one of the better programs. There's some better ones out there. Cool term. But you can actually use Screen also. Okay, from here we go options. We're going to set this to 115-200, all these same settings. If that works, we're going to go ahead and connect. Okay, it seemed to connect. And let's see what happens when we power it up. Nothing.
90%.
There you go. That's if I didn't do something else wrong.
Daryl, if you were using screen to output this, would you just set screen or read the baud rate then?
What's that?
If you were using screen to output instead of true term, you didn't just set screen to use the baud rate versus the baud rate?
Yeah, yeah. plenty, I use screen half the time and use this half the time. Okay. Let's isolate disconnect options. I probably had it right the first time. I did not pick the device. Let's try it again.
There we go.
So hopefully this will boot up and prompt us for a logon prompt, and not boot up as root. If it boots up the root, I'll apologize if someone didn't set it back to its default. But what we're going to do is we're going to walk through a hack against the device, how to get into U-boot console, and the attack we're going to talk about, I'll show it on the circuit board here in a minute. We'll go ahead and let this thing boot up. Hopefully it doesn't prompt us with a user account, and it works. Okay, good. So it's prompted us for a logon, we don't know the password. This is the common state for breaking into devices. The vulnerability we're going to show you is kind of unique to Hue. It's like horribly bad, stupid, but it's kind of interesting. What they did was, what we're going to do is we're going to show you how to attack the device from a hardware perspective and force it to fail into a U-boot console. Turns out they wrote the actual root password as an environment variable within U-boot. And then what we'll do is we will rewrite the argument in U-boot, write it back out to the chip, reboot the device, and give ourselves root access to the device. Now that's the goal. Let's see how it works. Okay, we're going to go ahead and unplug the power on this thing, and we're going to step over here to this device to see if we can actually talk about it. Okay, the two chips that are interesting on here is these two chips right here and right here. This here is a standard 8-pin SPI flash chip, okay? This chip over here is actually a NAND chip. This is a footprint known as a WSON. It's 5 by 6 millimeters, I think. This chip here contains the U-boot, okay? This chip here contains the kernel. And the way the attack works, this is a good training example because it's not so critical time dependent. But when the device powers up, U-boot launches. U-boot will call the NAND chip via SPI communication, and it'll load the kernel operating system into memory and execute it from U-boot. Our goal is, as soon as U-boot's done, we're actually going to take the flash chip's data line 0 to ground. So U-boot will fail to actually load the kernel. When U-boot fails to load a kernel, it'll fail over into a console. Sound good?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now let me find some jumpers here. Now I did ring out another ground on here. The other ground happens to be right here. And the one thing we want to do is shrink this up if I can. So you can see me ground it out. So, I'm going to disappear back here for a second. So as we look at the circuit here, the actual data line was about right here, okay, on that chip. But we traced it out to a location right here, which makes it easier to ground it out. Just a little picture, I don't know if you could see it. Yeah, you can see it right there sticking up. That also actually connects to data line 0. And the way it works is you want to get this thing set up because you have to be quick. And you hold the ground on it, and if you did it right, boom, it drops into an ATH console. ATH console, this is the actual U-boot console. So there's all kinds of different commands in here. You can tell U-boot to call the actual kernel from a NFS server. You can call it from some other source. There's all kinds of configurations. You can set all the arguments in here. There's a number of one of the commands is print environment, env. Print env will actually show you all of the environment variables. And if we look real close right here, we can see that there's some kind of potential hash written in there to an argument called security. So what we want to do is we want to set env security, double quote, print env. It should move the last argument change to the lower part, so it moves it down to the bottom. Another interesting thing to point out is this boot delay. If you're actually hacking on a device and you break into it at this point, if you want to keep doing that ping glitch every time you need to get into it, that's fine. But if it's a hard one, you want to set boot delay to like 4 seconds, and it will actually prompt you to halt the boot process of U-boot. So you can hit a enter key, and it will actually drop into the console automatically within that 4-second time frame. So you can easily modify U-boot so you don't have to do this attack anymore. And it will give you access to do other things in U-boot. Now, what's that?
Is the unit on boot delay seconds, or is it the deciseconds thing from
You know, I take it as seconds. I don't know if there's any kind of weird variance to that I'm not aware of. But it appears to be close to my human seconds as possible. So I usually set it to 3 or 4. Gives me enough time to enter it. Also, if you've noticed on that boot, I don't know if people were watching the boot up, there was a function that came across called F for debug. So you hit F. That'll actually, it won't work. I don't think it works on this one, but if it's set up correctly in their system, it'll actually take the device into single user mode, which is also good. Once you get into single user mode, you are potentially root. I think this one and one other device I had, no matter how many times you hit F, it just never did anything. But I've had other devices where I was able to do that, and then got into the actual operating system and said, hey, I want all the firmware off the device, and then find out in single user mode that all the USB and network and everything shut down, and it wouldn't let me start none of them up. I was able to pull off the U-boot, or the USB one. What I did was like, okay, I started looking and it said USB was configured, had all the pointers, everything that needed to be in place, but it wasn't there. So I actually went and actually found the instructions for redoing it. And I checked, is this structure there? Is this data there? Is there data? And there was some weird, and like I said, I'm not no Linux guru when it comes to some of these connected port type functions. But it had one where it called some kind of weird drive function. I'm thinking, and I ran that in there, and all the USBs came up. I'm like, yes! And from there, I was able to plug in, pull all the firmware off just by DD it off. The other interesting thing to note, so you understand all these devices, at least all of the IoT devices, there's typically 2 kernels and 2 file systems on the device. So if you pull off the partitions and look at the actual partitions that are written to the flash memory chips, there'll be, it could be anywhere from, 8 different partitions all the way up to 50. I've seen upwards of 50 partitions. But you'll have 2 root file system partitions and 2 kernel partitions. The purpose of that is for firmware updates. And the way it works is if you dig through the arguments here, I don't know if we'll see it up here. No, we don't. Boot from slot 1, that may be it, I'm not sure. Kind of difference on different ones. It'll actually tell the system what is the primary kernel and the primary file system partition. So when you do a firmware upgrade, what it'll do is it'll bring it down to the system and it'll do a DD of that firmware onto the ones that are not online. It'll alter U-boot arguments and then reboot itself and then come up on the new partitions. That way, if anything corrupts, it fails back to the original, you don't brick the device. And that old data will still stay on that offline partition up until the next firmware upgrade, and then it'll switch back the other way. So if you get root level access to these devices and you want to actually pull data off of them, you can DD it. DD's on every one of these devices, so you can easily pull all the partitions off. Next thing is we want to set ENV. And, oh, I'm sorry. We want to save ENV. Right. So now we can see it wrote all those environment variables back out, write out the address, write the flash, and it completed all of it. Now if we pull the power on it, power it back up. Used it Black Hat and RSA for random individuals coming up and letting them do some of this stuff from a training perspective. And it's kind of funny because it was, I don't know, hundreds of people have actually pounded on these devices. I took them to Rapid 7 where we had a bunch of salespeople and all this with them. And they totally destroyed one of the devices. I still didn't figure out, the environment variables are gone. They completely wiped off the entire thing. So it won't even boot up or do anything. And I'm like, how did you do that? I just want to know. No one knows because we were watching them. They didn't really do anything. You just decided to go blank on them. So I actually have that device here. So my goal is to, when I get back home, to actually pull the firmware off and just reflash the chip and put all the boot image back on there. So we'll come along here. Let's see. Did it work? Yes, it did. There you go. That's going to look crappy because, well, it says we're reading, so I know how to fix that. So, any questions? Yes, sir.
You keep mentioning DD, the ROM chips. How do you do that through a remote connection?
How do you, what, DD? Well, you don't, unless you have a console. If you can get root on the device some way, whether it's remote or through physical access, then you can DD it. Their whole process for firmware update is it goes out and pulls the firmware, drops on the device, and then code runs on the system. That runs DD on the system. That's how the firmware upgrades take place. If you're wanting to pull the data off these, if you're wanting to get the firmware off the devices, there's several ways. One, physical access. I have physical access to this, and I got a console, and I get root level, I can DD everything off. I can DD off over the network. I can DD off to a USB plugged into the device. Typically what I do is I DD it to the temps folder and then move it all as one block off there when I'm doing that. The other way is actually pulling the chips. So you can pull the flash chip, you can pull the NAND chip. There's readers for all of those, and they vary in price. I have like, if you have money, you can go out and buy like a really cool chip readers that are like $5-6 grand, and all the plug-in things for them are like $1,000 a piece. So when you have everything to actually read most chips out there, it's going to cost you $10,000 to $15,000. I don't have $10,000 to $15,000, nor would I ask my company to do that for me. When I can go buy a $100 chip reader, and I have like 3 different $100 chip readers that cover nearly as many chips as that $5,000 to $10,000 one. It just happens to have lower quality readers, holders, and stuff like that. So when you start messing with it, you can't abuse them. You have to take care of them. The more expensive ones take a little more abuse when you're dropping chips in and stuff like that. The cheap ones don't. So you got to be a little more cautious with those. And I put together a bunch of training kits for doing a number of different things. So I have like 15 chip readers of the same type sitting in my house for doing various training. But pulling the chips is basically one of the easier ways. If you can't get root access. I think we have some other device here as an example. This one I was going to bring if we actually had time to go over. I'm not going to go into it completely, but I'm going to talk about, I'd like to at least talk about this from a conceptual standpoint. It'll take a little less time than I get like to get through it. This device here, we ended up building a number of training sessions off this. Move this out of here. Put this, and then this won't take but a few minutes, and we can get out of here.
What is the device supposed to be in its original form?
The device's purpose was to control Bluetooth-based lights in your house. Is what its purpose is. This particular device is an actual Insteon device. I have a bunch of wires hooked to this one. This device has a number of different things. This has PIC processors on it. And these PIC processors, that's what this is here, that's a PIC processor, and this over here is a PIC processor. All of these header mounts along here are actually in-circuit serial programmers where you can actually hook PIC kits, small $18 readers on there, and actually use the manufacturer's software and actually see all the security configurations for the entire chips. See if they're protected, they're not protected, if not protected, pull the firmware off or write your own firmware on there. In this case here, the manufacturer's device never protected none of the chips, so you have access to all of them. The reason why these wires are hooked here, this was a project I was dealing with, and this here happens to be an RF chip right here. This is an MRF 49 chip. This does multi-band frequency. I think it does 433, 800 and something, and 915 megahertz. The manufacturer that produces this board is Insteon, and they have their own RF communication protocol. It's frequency shift keying, and they published an entire paper on their protocol so everyone can integrate with it. Turns out their paper that they wrote on their protocol is total bullcrap, totally inaccurate, and if you follow it, you'll never connect to this device for nothing. So it was like, well, how is the device actually configured? That was my goal. I want to figure out how it's actually configured. Well, the MRF actually has a data sheet. So I went out first thing and I got the data sheet. Let's get this. MRF. I'm not sure you'll be able to read this. We'll try to expand it out here in a second. Down here too. And if we look right here, any bigger? But if we look here, this actually has registers in the MRF chip that define what frequency offset is, what each peak of the frequency's band frequency is. So it has all that data and it's set with all these registers. The actual data sheet will actually go in and break this actually down. Let's get to this one right here. So this breaks it all down. So it's 16 bits binary, and this actually defines it. So that will define whether it happens to fall into this general configuration register. And this will actually go down, and some of the bits will tell you whether it's 915, 860. And there's other registry entries throughout the device that actually tell it all that stuff. So how does it get this control? How does it get this information on boot up? Well, it turns out that the actual PIC processor right here, this PIC processor right here, which is a PIC 16, smaller, narrow 16-bit processor, actually sends all the commands at boot up. So you tap into it with a logic analyzer, which is all the wires that are attached in here. The 4 wires that I hooked up, connect to the actual chip, and you can capture it with a logic analyzer at boot up, turn it, decode it as SPI, have it output the binary, and it looks just like the data sheet. You can go through and go, that's what it is, that's what it is. And there's up to 17 commands. This device gets 16 commands that actually define it for what its purpose is. And we can identify all the frequency offsets. It'll actually tell you based on the settings what the actual farads of capacitors are on board, actually within the data sheet based on those settings, or what you should put it if you use them certain ones. So I actually validated these and checked it and said, yeah, it's actually accurate. And from there, we were able to map out the entire protocol so that we dropped into like something analyzing more RF signals. We had something more that made more sense. Because when I was looking at it, so you have, I can't remember, they said the band frequency on each peak was supposed to be a max of 75 kHz with 200 kHz separation. Well, theirs was 150 Hz separation, and the band pass was set at like 60 Hz to 60 kHz, which when you're trying to set something up to capture and decode this stuff, that's not going to work. You're not even close. But we could quickly pull that data out of the actual chip by analyzing in-circuit communication. Yes, sir?
The Ancyon is supposed to send the frequency through the electrical wires? Is that what that's for?
No, this isn't. This is pure RF. You're thinking of the gosh, what was that? 10 X10. Yeah, they also X10 was their older one. This was kind of an RF kind of version of it.
Okay. So what you're seeing those frequencies, that's got nothing to do with what?
Yeah, in this case, it's purely RF. It's going out. In this case, it's going out at under 915 megahertz frequency band, and it's 200 kilohertz or 200K separation, frequency shift key communication that we're actually able to determine by actually looking at the board. So I think it's getting a little late. So any other questions?
Will you do my cable box?
You bring it in here, well, I'll be glad to tear it apart at some of these events. We'll
Of course,
just tear
you
it
have to
apart.
pay for it though, right?
I can't help you there.
That one, you have to use a Dremel on that one.
Just tell the cable companies to
Take the components off of the Dremel. So I've actually removed components with a cold chisel before. We had an engagement where the devices we were working at turned out they were impact-resistant devices. So all the chips were epoxy to the board, and we were trying to read one of the memory chips, and I desoldered it, and it wouldn't come off. And I pulled all the legs straight up in the air, and it still wouldn't come off. It was like, hit it with a chisel, knocked it off, it was still intact, and we were able to read it. I had one device I was doing for a company that was it was built off of a phone footprint, like a Android phone footprint, so it was an Android operating system. But as the hardware attack, they wanted me to check whether I could get data off the chip. So we pulled the embedded multimedia controller. Everything was epoxy one. So I went around and I ground around the base of the chip into the board to take the epoxy off so I could get a metal spudge up underneath the edge. And then I put the whole device in an RF oven, heated it up till everything came loose, and I popped the chip off intact. The thing is, the jolt of doing that, I flung components all over the room. So I had all these little caps and resistors and chips and memory chips and all this stuff. So I swept them all up and put them in a bag. sent it back to him.
That's why I said, he said this doesn't work.
No, this was actually a pay engagement. And it was using full disk encryption, which is one of the things we wanted to validate how really full disk encryption was. So
So you just say that's secure?
yes. Yeah, I griped at him about that. There's all this epoxies of pain. And I never put nothing back together. So I just completely had the whole phone thing stripped apart. So I just dumped every bit of it in a plastic bag, zipped it up, and I goes, here you go. I don't think this will probably work anymore. That was part of the engagement. When we do engagements, we typically get 2 devices from the manufacturer. We'll initially use both of them for various testing, but then toward the end, one will be a teardown. So we'll literally just disassemble the whole device, pull firmware off of it, try to inject data in it, try to get root level access to it, try to alter its running configuration. And the reason why we want to test a lot of different things. I mean, we had an engagement, I'm not going to say the product, but it was a product deployed literally all over the world, probably at a couple thousand large installations. And the guy had to go on site to do it because it was a large device. So the manufacturer didn't want to send it to us, nor did they want us to take it apart. They wanted to take it apart. So they took it apart for him, and they disassembled this large device. And then halfway through the disassembly, he's jacking into all these components. He eventually gets root level control of the device, pivots through this device into the corporate network, and takes over every one of the systems around the world because of that. So that's one of the things when we get this level of access. What does that mean? If I can get that level of access on a device I'm testing, it gives me the chance to also rewrite like SSL keys when this thing's calling out the cloud APIs. Now I can man and middle the cloud APIs from the actual hardware, which is also something we want to do.
So on that Hue Bridge, you can change the MAC addresses too, so you can spoof.
Yeah, you can pretty much change anything. Once you're root on the device or get to that level, it's game over. You can pretty much change everything you want. And I've done it before. I put certificates on it, route everything through burp, so that I can actually start looking at the hardware's communication. I can decode it and decrypt it, which comes in handy. And then you can carry out other attacks. So we pull the firmware off and try to figure out what kind of data is in the firmware. We don't do full reverse engineering because that's very time expensive. To do it right, you're not talking about a few days. You're talking about a month. Or more, a dedicated time to actually truly reverse some of the firmware. So what we look for is keys, hard-coded passwords. We look for undocumented commands. We look for URLs, IP addresses, anything that's telling us what this device is doing and where it's going, and can we leverage that to carry out further attacks. Undocumented cans, I did an assessment. You guys are going to stand here and listen. So hold on a second, you find it. I was contacted by Associated Press, and they said that they were in Colombia, South America, and Colombia, South America had recommended the government that they actually purchase these panic buttons. So it's a panic button that you wear, you press the button, and it kind of calls somebody for help, when the Colombian drug lord is about ready to grab you. And they were really curious how secure they were. They didn't pay us for the work, so it was all open source work. So I went out and bought 3 of these from the manufacturer, and we started looking at them. To say the least, I can't really go to Colombia, South America anymore.
Did you want to?
But the amount of problems we found in this thing is, one this thing is SMS messages. So it's configured via SMS messages. You can set a PIN number on it. So when you set a PIN code on this device, it can't be altered unless you know the PIN code. Now it's 4 digits, but if you're willing to sit there and send 10,000 messages, you may be able to figure it out if you want to go through that much trouble. I assure you someone would probably figure it out by the time you've done that. But I pulled the code off this. It's fairly easy. I just pulled the chip, pulled the memory out, started looking through it, and I found 2 commands. There's 2 commands on this. One was actually documented in a manual. I'll talk about it in a minute. But one of them actually reboot. So if you send any of the commands to this device over SMS, you get no response back unless you get the password right. Well, I found an undocumented command called boot, all in uppercase. Now there was a reboot. There is a reboot on here, all lowercase. but I found another command in there called reboot all uppercase. Turns out when I send the command reboot all uppercase, it actually responds back with a message with enough detail I can actually fingerprint that this device is an actual panic button. So literally, and that's way much easier because, hey, if I want to find out all the reporters that I want to kidnap and sell back to the company, you know, they're all in the same place. They're probably all in the same phone system. I just send out, you know, several thousand useful ones, and now I identified everybody. The other command, which is in the documentation, this is the scary one. So once I take that one, fingerprint all the devices that are actually in the city, what I do next is I can actually send a factory reset over SMS without a password. The device goes back to nothing. At that point, I can query your GPS coordinates. I can also turn it into a remote listening device so I can monitor you. And of course, it wipes away the fact that when you go running down the street pressing the button, the only people who are getting alerts are the 4 guys behind you. And that was one of the things where I pointed out when you're doing assessments. When we do assessments, there's open intelligence that you want to do. Service manuals are so useful. Anytime you want to attack somebody, I don't care what the product is, the system, the application, read the service manuals. Service manuals will give you all the goods on any technology. I can't remember how many times over the years as a pen tester that service manuals just gave away the keys. I work for a Fortune 500 company, and one guy come up to me and he's like, Daryl, you're just a smart ass. You think you know everything about hacking. I'm like, no. He goes, I challenge you. I challenge you to get into my SAP system, which I personally secured and I know solid. I went back to my desk, downloaded the SAP manuals offline, skimmed them for the word password, root, elevated privileges, and 15 minutes later I was logged into his system with full root Zeus level access. He never called me a smart ass again.
Did you get a Christmas card from him?
Well, yeah, he sent it.
And the reason why is the more complex, remember, the more complex the system is, the more likely it's going to be deployed incorrectly. And often in those more complex systems, when you get into those big IBM systems and SAP systems, they come with a lot of modules, a lot of functionality. Every one of those functionalities has its own root, or Zeus, or whatever you want to call it. They have their own. And when people install these things, they go, we don't know what we're going to use. Let's install all of it. And then they only configure 10 to 20% of it. So all you have to do is figure out that other 70, 80% that they've never configured, that they've installed, and you can actually use most of that tech to gain full access to complex systems. And that's what I did with the SAP system, because I knew how those guys work. It's like, just install it all, we'll figure out what we need later. Well, I don't want to keep you here all night, so thank you very much.